Okay, good morning everybody, and Hazak Baruch. Thank you everyone for joining us on this beautiful Thursday morning as we are studying together Perashat Shofetim. A Shofet is a judge. Our Perashah commands us to establish judges and officers in our cities. We spoke about the idea of a Sanhedrin in a previous class. Our Perashah tells us, if we open to chapter 17, it tells us something very interesting. Just to read a couple of psukim rather quickly. If there will be found among you in one of your cities, which Hashem has given you, a man or a woman who commits what is evil in the eyes of Hashem to violate his covenant. Okay, so the Torah over here is telling us about someone who worships idols. He will go and serve gods of others and prostrate himself to them, or to the sun, or to the moon, or to any host of the heavens, which I have not commanded. Okay, so if there's somebody who does avodah zarah, and it will be told to you, and you will hear, then you shall investigate. And behold, it is true, the testimony is correct. This abomination was done in Israel. So what happens to somebody who commits something that's avodah zarah? What do we do to them? The Torah says, you shall remove that man or that woman who did the evil thing to your cities. You shall pelt them with stones so that they will die. Okay, so this is the Torah telling us the very graphic death of Sekilah. Sekilah is one of the 4 types of deaths that Beit Din administered. Now again, it's important to remember whenever we read the Torah and psukim like this, and they discuss the death penalty that the Beit Din would give, we have to remember that Beit Din rarely ever actually killed somebody. Although they're supposed to, and the Torah tells them to, but there's also another mitzvah, and that is to try to find a loophole, an excuse for the guy. Of course, we're not going to let him out in the streets. They still put him in jail. But to try to avoid giving him the death penalty, Gemara says, if you killed once every 7 years, it was considered excessive. If there was a Beit Din that would found somebody guilty. Because there were, again, a lot of conditions that had to be met for somebody to deserve the punishment of one of the 4 capital punishments. The Torah then tells us how many witnesses do we need in order to find someone guilty, in order to condemn somebody. Torah says, by the testimony, very good, of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall the condemned person be put to death. He shall not be put to death by the testimony of a single witness. Okay? So that's also very important. You're not allowed to believe just one person. This is actually very, very complicated question now. A lot of times, let's say somebody comes and they say, this person did this thing to me. Are we to believe one person? How can we trust the testimony of just one person? Torah says you don't believe one person. So it gets very complicated in especially, current events, things that happen. And of course, the halakha tells us how to handle each and every case. But in general, one witness alone is not enough. You can't just believe one person when they say something. We need 2 witnesses. What's very interesting is the Torah writes not 2, but it writes 2 or 3. So which one is it, 2 or 3? The answer is obviously 2. 2 is enough. So if 2 is enough, why does it write 3? 2 witnesses should be enough, so the Torah shouldn't say 2 or 3, just 2. 2 or 100 also. Why is Torah writing the number 3? And the Gemara learns from here something very powerful. What is the law if 2 witnesses come and say one thing, and then 5 come and say the opposite? I'll give you an example. 5 witnesses walk into Beit Din, they say, we saw Reuven kill Shimon. We saw it with our own eyes. Okay? We're in arbitration. All of a sudden, 2 witnesses come in and say, we saw that he didn't kill him. Who do we believe, the 5 or the 2? The answer is, they're both equally powerful. When the Torah says 2 or 3, it's telling us 2 is equal to 3. We don't give more weight to the group that has more people in it. That's a very interesting halakha. But today, I would like to study the Hebrew for a minute and share with you something that Rabbi Bernstein says. And I actually heard a class that he gave many years ago instead of his father. So it was very interesting to hear him as a younger person and then to hear his classes all the time now in more recent years. The Torah says in Hebrew, Al-pi shnayim edim. What does that mean, Al-pi shnayim edim? By the testimony of 2 witnesses, right? However, we should know that the Torah tells us a drop later, a very similar halakha, that we need 2 witnesses. So keep one finger here by 17:6. And now let's fast forward to 19:15. Okay, 19:15, over here it's talking about, again, witnesses. Lo yakum ed ehad beish. One witness is not enough. A single witness shall not stand up against any man for any iniquity. Okay? Al pi shnei edim or al pi shelosha edim yakum davar. You need 2 or 3. Okay, we just saw that. But did you notice a difference in the language? Did you notice a slight difference? One more time, I'll read the first pasuk back in 17:6. Al pi shnayim edim o shlosha edim. Here it says al pi shnei edim o al pi shelosha edim. The difference is shnayim and shnei. You see, in Hebrew, the number 2, when you just want to say the number by itself, you say shnayim. Echad, shnayim, shlosha, or shalosh. But when you want to say 2 of something, it's not shnayim. For example, how do you say 2 books in Hebrew? How do you say the 2 tablets Moshe comes down with? You don't say shnayim luchot. You say shnei luchot. Right? Very good. 2 tablets. So in Hebrew, 2, in English it's the same. The number 2 and 2 tablets. But in Hebrew it's very different. It's shnayim or shnei luchot. That's the right way of saying it. But it's very interesting because when it comes here to the capital punishment case of idolatry, it doesn't say shnei edim, it says shnayim edim. And the question is, why the change? Again, the first one is more correct. The second one is more correct. The one later in 19:15. Over there it says it the right way. It says shnei edim. That's the way it should be in Hebrew. Grammatically, that's the correct way. But the question the commentaries discuss is, why does it say over here shnayim edim in chapter 17, pasuk 6? And I'd like to share with you 2 answers to this question. Amazing answers. The first answer is given by Rabbi Yehoshua Heller. And he says as follows. Shnei means 2, right? 2. I have 2 books. I have shtei sfarim. But the 2 things are not necessarily connected. It's just telling me the quantity, how many I have. I have over here 2 bottles of water, but they're not connected in any way, shape, or form. I just happen to have 2 of them. I have 1 bottle and I have another bottle, and I put them together, I have 2 bottles, right? But it's not that they're a unit. They're not working together. Shnayim is when there's a union, when they're connected. So as an example, everybody, if you could please turn to the Haftarah of Perashat Shelach Lecha Anashim, where Moshe Rabbeinu sends, Shelach is where Moshe sends the spies. The Haftarah that we read is where Yehoshua sends the spies. If you don't have a Chumash with the Haftarah in the back, you could open to Joshua chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2. Take a look. Vayishlach Yehoshua binun min hashitim shnayim anashim meraglim. Yehoshua sends shnayim anashim, 2 men to spy. And the word that's used is shnayim. Fast forward just a few psukim. They go to a lady's house. Her name is Rachav. She hides them in her house. The king somehow finds out that there's spies in the city. Vayishlach, and the king sends a message to the lady to go to send the spies to her. Vatikach ha'isha, chapter 2, pasuk 4. The lady then takes et shnei ha'anashim, the two men, and she hides them. And she says to the king, yes, they were here, but they left. I don't know where they are now. And she saves the lives of these two Jewish spies. Okay, very interesting. However, Rabbi Yehoshua Heller notes that, and he notices that in the beginning it says that Yehoshua sends Shnaim Anashim, two men. When Rachav hides them, it says she hides the Shnei Ha'anashim. Over here using not Shnaim, but Shnei. What happened? How come they started off as Shnaim and then they changed to Shnei? Very interesting observation. And he explains that when they set off on their mission in the beginning, they were one. They were working together. And therefore, Shnayim Anashim. But when she hides them each separately. Because if you look at the Hebrew, it says, she took the two people, Vatitzpeno. What's Vatitzpeno? Vatitzpeno means she hid him. But there were two of them. It should have said Vatitzpenam. I think that's the way to say it at least. Why does it say Vatitzpeno? The answer is she hid each one individually. And therefore the two are no longer connected. Each one was hidden by himself. And therefore it says not Shnaim, but Shnei. And he's going to bring a couple more examples. But by the way, he makes a beautiful, nice anecdote over here. Look how important in our lives attitude can be. Compare these two spies with the first time Moshe sends spies. This time they go and they get caught. People notice them. They have to go in hiding and they get scared for their lives. Yet when they return back to Yehoshua and Yehoshua says, so how was it? What's their answer? He says, oh, it was great. Let's go, guys. Let's get it. They're very positive, very upbeat. When Moshe sends the spies, they go, they're not detected, everything is great. Hashem even sends people, he sends a lot of funerals so they don't get noticed. And all of a sudden, they come back and they only have bad things to say. Right? So look how important in life our perspective can be. We could have a good experience and we could think of it in a bad way. We could have a bad experience and think of it in a positive way. Okay? So this is one example, Yehoshua with the Meraglim, and that's why Shnaim and Shnei. Before we come back to our parasha, he gives us one more example. Go please to book of Exodus, book of Shemot, chapter 25. This is the chapter 25, pasuk 18. This is the building of the Mishkan, Perashat Terumah. The Torah tells us that we had many vessels. One of them, the most famous one of all, is the Aron, the Holy Ark. On top of the ark there was a lid, and on the lid there were two cherubim. Right? A cherub, hard to really translate. I don't know if it's like an angel. There were two statues on top. Right? They looked like they had wings. They looked like, angels, faces of children. And look at the pasuk over here, chapter 25, pasuk 18. God says to Moses, "Ve'asita shnaim keruvim zahav." Make two keruvim out of gold. But again, the word that's used is not shnei keruvim, which would have been better. Instead it says shnaim. Okay? Why? Sorry, just trying to adjust the camera. Okay, it says shnaim keruvim. Okay? Now put that on hold, keep a finger there, and fast forward to Perashat Vayakel, where they actually end up building the Mishkan. So over here, just a few chapters later, chapter 37, Pasuk 7, and it says, Vayas, he made Shnei Keruvim Zahav. He made the two golden Keruvim. But it doesn't say Shnaim. Again, it changes from Shnaim back in Perashat Terumah to Shnei in our Perasha, in Perashat Vayakel. Why the shift? Says Rabbi Heller, based on what we said, that Shnayim means they're together. Shnei means not necessarily. We have a very easy answer to our question. Originally they were meant to be together. But our rabbis tell us that when the Jewish people were following the ways of Hashem, the Keruvim would look at each other. But when they didn't, the Keruvim would look away from each other. In Perashat Terumah, the goal was the Kerubim to be connected, Shnayim. But we unfortunately did Chet HaEgel. Perashat Vayakel is right after the Egel, and therefore they're no longer Shnayim, they're no longer facing each other. Now they are not a pair, they are just two of separate things. They're looking away, each one in their own direction, and therefore the word Shenei is used. And in a way you can say that our job was to get those Kerubim to come back and face each other again and to be Shnayim. With all of this in mind, says Rabbi Heller, let us go now to our parasha by the witnesses. Shnayim witnesses, two witnesses, or Shnei witnesses. Again, chapter 17, pasuk number Vav, pasuk 6. Take a look, Rabotai, and he explains something that's nothing short of remarkable. There is something called, right, edim, witnesses. In any case, you need two witnesses. Capital punishment or monetary law, it doesn't matter. You always need two witnesses. However, when it comes to capital punishment, to kill somebody, for witnesses to testify against someone to kill them, they not only need to see what happened, they also need to be able to see each other. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I see someone killing someone down there. I see somebody who's a murderer, who's doing in the middle of the act of murder. Somebody on the other side also sees him. But I don't see the other witness. There's a tree in between us. We can both see the murder taking place, but the witnesses cannot see each other. That's called edut meyuhedet. That's testimony that each witness was alone. For capital punishment, that's not acceptable. For monetary cases, it is. And therefore the Torah, says Rabbi Heller, the Torah is actually hinting to that halacha in the pasuk. The pasuk says, when it comes to capital punishment, Alpi Shenayim Edim. Shnayim means that they're a unit. When it comes to capital punishment, the witnesses have to be Shnayim. Not enough to be two. They have to be a pair. They have to be able to see each other. Shnayim, connected. One. When it comes to monetary cases, that's later on. That was the one in chapter 19, pasuk 15. Over there it just says Shnei, because there is no halacha, there is no requirement that they actually be a unit. You could have two separate people that don't see each other, and that's enough to testify. Beautiful. And by the way, it's like that in any other case except for capital punishment. When it comes to testifying on the new moon, one guy saw the new moon, he could come in. And another guy saw the new moon, he could come in. And they could testify together, separately. Together, but they didn't see each other. That's allowed by money, and therefore the pasuk says Shnei. Very nice. That's the answer of Rabbi Yoshua Heller. The Netziv answers something a little bit slightly differently, and we'll end with his answer. And again, he goes back to Perashat Terumah, to the Kerubim, to these golden angels that were over the ark with their wings and everything. But over there, he quotes Rabbeinu Bachye. Rabbeinu Bachye was a medieval scholar. And Rabbeinu Bachye, he again asks the question why one time it says Shnayim and one time it says Shenei. And he explains a little bit differently. He says Shnayim, again it means a pair, together, like Raglaim, Einayim, Yadayim. We don't say Yadim, Yadayim. Right? The word Shnayim is two things that work together. However, this is so beautiful. And save this for like a Sheva Berachot speech one day. Okay? Many times in life, for things to be able to work together, it's actually the difference between them that makes them so appropriate to be able to function as a pair. I'll give you an example. Okay? How do you say scissors in Hebrew? Scissors is misparayim. Misparayim is two blades, but actually they're not two identical blades. They're blades, but in the opposite direction. If you took two of the same blade and put them together, they wouldn't cut. It's specifically because one of them, the blade is on one side and the blade is on the other side. That's why it's able to function. Okay? Yadayim, our hands. We have two hands and they're very similar, but it's specifically because they're different that allows us to function. The right hand and the left hand are not the same. Imagine a person had two right hands. That would look like this, right? The thumb on both sides on this side. But that's not how that wouldn't work so well. Our eyes, our enayim, they don't work both the same. Actually, it's from the two different spots that they're on the face that gives them a different vantage point. One sees a little bit further, one sees a little bit closer. Our ears, they hear different things from different directions, and they allow us to create that balance. It's a very important lesson, not only for our body, but it's also an important lesson in a marriage. A husband and wife, often we think that a person could be going out with someone and they realize how different they are and they get nervous. I'm very emotional, I'm very expressive of my feelings, and he's not. He's very he's a neat freak. He wants everything to be clean to the T, and I'm not so much like that. Things could be clean, but I don't overdo it. He's very punctual and I'm not punctual, right? So it's okay to be different on certain things. Okay, actually it's specifically and especially the differences between one husband and another that they end up complementing each other. And that's a very important lesson. It's something that I could testify is true for myself in my marriage. Thank God me and my wife are not the same. Okay? She's strong where I'm weak, and I'm strong where she's weak, and we complement each other in an amazing way, Baruch Hashem. The Keruvim were not the same. Our rabbis tell us that one had the facial features of a male, one had the facial features of a female, and therefore he points out that the pasuk says Shnaim Keruvim. That's why it uses Shnaim. He doesn't answer why later on it says Shnei, but using that idea and yesod of Rabbeinu Bachye, that things work as a pair, but they can't be exactly the same. That's the word Shnaim. We come back to witnesses. And the Yerushalmi is like we have Gemara that was written in Bavel, in Iraq, Talmud Bavli. There was a Gemara written at the very same time in Israel, in Jerusalem, called the Talmud Yerushalmi. It's not so studied, but it's very valuable. And if there's a machloket, usually between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, the Bavli wins. But if there's no dispute, then we actually go with what the Yerushalmi says. We give it credence. The Yerushalmi says something very interesting. And maybe I'll explain with a story that was said about, I believe, the Gaon Mevilna. Two witnesses one time, they came to a rabbi and they presented their case to the rabbi. They testified. The rabbi felt that they were lying, but he couldn't place his finger on it. But something just felt so wrong about the case. No matter how many times he questioned them, they got everything right. Everything was equal. Their testimonies were the same. But his gut was telling him they're lying. He didn't know what to do, so he decided to shift and pass the case to the Gaon Mevilna. So he says to the rabbi, they come in front of the Gaon Mevilna. The Gaon Mevilna listens to their testimony. He's hearing each one. He says, okay, go outside. Let me call the other guy in. Okay, now you tell me what happened. The other guy comes in and he says what happened. The Gaon Mevilna also, he feels something is wrong over here. He can't place it. So he kicks him out. He sends the first guy back in. Tell me what you see. And he asks him all the questions. Okay, please wait outside. He brings the other guy back in. And he does this a few times till he finally brings them both in. And he stands up and he looks at them in the eyes and he says, you guys are liars. And if you don't admit it, we're going to do edim zomemin to you. We're going to give you what you wanted to happen to that guy. And they started shaking and they realized that they were caught. And they started crying and pleading, Rabbi, please forgive us. You're right. We were lying. We didn't mean it. We'll never do it again. And they asked the Gaon Mevilna, Rabbi, how did you know? And he quoted this Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says that if the witnesses, they have to be identical, right? They have to be similar. But if they're exactly the same, if they repeat word for word verbatim what the other one said, then continue to question them. If they're so exact, if they're literally repeating word for word, sometimes too similar is no good, because it sounds rehearsed. It sounds like they were learning this for the last few weeks, reading it off a paper. How could it be that each one's answering exactly the same words that the other guy's answering? Impossible. So they have to be similar, but not identical. And therefore, says the Torah, says the Netziv, Shnayim Edim. Shnayim, we learn, means things that are similar, but they can't be identical. Like Yadayim, 2 hands, but they're not identical. They're similar. We have thumbs and four fingers, right? 5 altogether. They're very similar, but they're not the same. They're not both like this. One's this way, one's that way. One's the right, one's the left. The eyes, everything to work together, they have to be similar, but they can't be exactly the same. Same, in the words of Mr. Miyagi. Same but different, or different but same. I forgot what he said. Okay, they have to be same but different. Okay, that is the halakha as well by witnesses. They have to be same, similar but different. Shnayim. They can't be exactly the same. And therefore, the Torah writes it in the beginning by capital punishment in chapter 17, pasuk 6. And of course, copy and paste to all other cases. So that is, I think, something very worthwhile remembering, something that we could apply again to our relationships. Remembering how actually it's something very good to compliment somebody else. You don't have to be the same as someone. Sometimes having someone who's different than you, whether it's in a marriage, it could be in an office, in the workforce, it could be in our businesses, it could be on a team. Imagine a basketball team had 5 centers. That would be very bad. Imagine 5 Shaquille O'Neals on a basketball team. You can't have a team like that. You need a guy that could pass. You need the guy that could jump. You need the guy that could shoot. You need 5 different people. You know, a lot of times you see something very interesting. You see teams that have an amazing all-star lineup. Whether it's baseball or basketball, doesn't matter. And a lot of times those teams do not perform well. And you would think they're going to for sure win the finals. How many times do we see things like this? Teams that are like sick team, amazing team. They drafted amazingly. They have like 4 unbelievable players. Each one is top of the line. And yet they lose in the playoffs. Doesn't make sense. They're an all-star team. But the answer is sometimes having too many people that are the same doesn't benefit you. Right? Having too many all-stars is not a good thing. It's specifically having variety that is so important. Okay? It's important. And that's the job of a leader, the job of a coach, the job of a CEO, to figure out how can I have a team that they could work together, but each one has their own strength. Each one is different than the other. They cannot all be the same. That would not be healthy. That will not be beneficial. It's not healthy in a marriage. It's not healthy in other relationships. And that's I think something that's worth remembering. I think this was the mistake of the sun and the moon when God created the moon. Remember, it says in the beginning of the pasuk that God created the 2 large luminaries. Right? Shnei me'orot hagedolim, 2 large luminaries. And then it says the ma'or gadol and ma'or katan, the big one and the small one. And the commentaries are puzzled. You just said large. How could you call now one big and one small? The Midrash answers that originally the moon and the sun were created equal, same size. But the moon complained and said, God, you can't have 2 kings sharing the same crown. And God says, you're right. So we're going to make you smaller. And the mistake that the moon makes is that the moon fails to realize that sometimes it's possible to have different but equal. The sun's job was to be during the day. The moon's job was to be during the night. And the moon says, you can't have that. We can't both be big. And God says, you're not. You're different. And each one, your differences complement his and hers and whatever. And the moon couldn't realize that. The moon failed to realize this very important lesson that sometimes in life, it's very important to be different. We are different. We're not meant to be the same. And the world sometimes tells us, You are the same. There's no difference between a boy or a girl. There's no difference between this or that. And it's not true. There is a difference. But difference doesn't mean not equal. Different doesn't mean less important. Different and very important, different and very equal. And that is sometimes the differences between us allow us to function as a unit, as a society, as people. Okay, we'll stop over here. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.